The dining room was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a space but presses against the skin. A clock ticked steadily on the far wall, its rhythm marking every second like a countdown. The table was set with precision. 2 plates of roast chicken, mashed potatoes still steaming, and a bottle of red wine resting between them. David Carter sat at the table with his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, following every movement of his wife. He was a man who, to anyone else, appeared ordinary, mid-40s, a quiet historian who loved books and routine. But his stillness wasn't the stillness of an ordinary man. It was measured, trained. His gaze lingered on the details. Her hands, the way they trembled slightly as she poured the wine, the unnatural brightness in her smile. Claire's blonde hair fell around her shoulders, freshly brushed, and she wore the blue dress he had always said brought out her eyes. Tonight, though, those eyes looked restless, darting too quickly between him and the glass in front of him. Her fingers curled tight around the bottle, and when she set it down, the clink against the wood echoed sharper than it should have. David reached out, steadying the wine glass with one hand, his fingertips brushing the cool crystal stem. He swirled the liquid slowly, the deep red catching the light. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a simple gesture, but inside his mind alarms were already ringing. The air carried a faint sweetness beneath the wine's aroma, something too bitter, too sharp. His instincts, honed through years of training, whispered the truth. This wasn't just wine. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice soft and coaxing. "To us," she said, raising her own glass. Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes, David noticed, did not. He mirrored her, lifting his glass halfway, but he didn't drink. The rim touched his lips, and he let the cool glass brush against them without tilting. Across the table, Claire watched intently, and for the briefest second, he saw something flash in her gaze. Anticipation, fear, and something darker. David's chest tightened. Earlier that day, he had paused outside Claire's study, intending only to ask her about dinner plans. But the words he had overheard rooted him to the floor, cold and still. "Poison his drink tonight. Make it look natural." Her voice, whispering into the phone, and a voice on the other end? Her brother, Daniel. The memory replayed now, layered over the sight of her nervous hands and the bitter edge beneath the wine. He had been careful not to make a sound then, careful to step back, to pretend he hadn't heard. But he had heard, every word. And once you've lived as a spy, you don't ignore those things. You can't. His mind shifted back into patterns he thought he'd buried long ago. Observation, deduction, contingency. The man who sat at this table wasn't just a husband tonight. He was a ghost resurfacing, a shadow reawakening. Claire's hand twitched, brushing her hair back, and she spoke again. "It's a good vintage, you'll like it." Her tone was almost casual, but beneath it, David heard strain, the way a violin string threatens to snap under too much tension. He set his glass down gently, his expression unreadable. "Smells strong," he murmured. Her laugh was brittle. "That's how you know it's good." For a moment, silence stretched again, only the clock filling the space. David leaned back in his chair, studying her, as though seeing her for the first time. Not his wife of 12 years, not the woman who kissed him goodnight, but someone carrying a secret so heavy it bent her entire body out of shape. He thought of their son, Ethan, staying overnight at a neighbor's for a school project. He thought of the files he still kept locked away, files that tied him to missions Claire never knew about. And he thought of how betrayal rarely came from enemies in the field. It always came from those closest, the ones who knew where to slip the knife. Claire raised her glass again, smiling too wide. "To us," she repeated. David's hand tightened around his glass stem, but he didn't drink. Not yet. The night was just beginning, and the truth, whatever it was, waited in the shadows between them. David's hand stayed, wrapped around the stem of his glass, unmoving. Across the table, Claire's eyes flickered, first to his lips, then to the untouched wine, then back again. The silence stretched, and she filled it with another brittle laugh. "You're staring at me like I've grown horns," she said, her fork scraping against her plate. David leaned back, calm on the outside, storming on the inside. Maybe I'm just wondering why your hands are shaking. Her fingers froze mid-motion. The fork clattered softly onto porcelain, and she quickly hid her hands in her lap. I'm not shaking, she whispered, forcing a smile. But David's mind wasn't on her words anymore. It was replaying the moment in her study hours earlier. He had passed by the door, half open, catching only her profile as she hunched over her phone. Her voice had been low, sharp with urgency. Poison his drink tonight. Make it look natural. He hadn't moved. He had simply stood there, eyes fixed on the way her free hand trembled against the desk. And then he heard it, Daniel's voice on the other end. Her brother, a man David had always tolerated, never trusted. He had slipped away before she could notice, his training carrying him silently back down the hall. For hours he sat at his desk, pretending to grade papers for his university course. But in reality, he was mapping the possibilities. Motive, pressure, leverage, and more importantly, proof. That was when he retrieved the object he swore he'd never need again. From the bottom of his locked drawer, hidden under old manuscripts, he lifted a thin strip folded into a leather pouch, a toxin detector. Simple, discreet, the kind of tool he once used in back alleys and embassies. He'd carried it tonight the way some men carried a handkerchief. So when Claire poured the wine, he had angled the bottle just enough for a single drop to splash onto his watch band. To her, it looked accidental. To him, it was everything. The strip had shifted color almost instantly, faint but undeniable. Cyanide. Now, as Claire smiled weakly across from him, David let the weight of that knowledge settle in his chest. He wasn't paranoid. He wasn't imagining. She was trying to kill him. But why? He watched her push food around her plate, her appetite gone. Her shoulders were tense, drawn up like a cornered animal. And in her eyes, he saw something, fear, but not just of him. Fear of something larger, something outside this room. Claire, he said finally, his voice steady. If you wanted me gone, there are easier ways. Her eyes snapped up, wide, panicked. What are you talking about? He leaned forward, lowering his tone. Who told you to do it? For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then she forced another smile, but this one cracked almost instantly. David, you sound crazy. It's just dinner. Just wine. He tapped the rim of his glass lightly with his finger. Then drink mine. The blood drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. That silence told him everything. David exhaled slowly, leaning back, letting her believe he might ease off. But inside, his mind tightened. Every lesson drilled into him during his years as a spy whispered the same truth. Betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It comes from the ones closest to you. And tonight, the woman he had trusted with his life was hiding something that could destroy it. The clock on the wall ticked louder, each second hammering into the quiet. Somewhere outside, a car rolled slowly past, headlights sweeping across the curtains. Claire flinched. David noticed. She wasn't just guilty, she was terrified, which meant the poison wasn't just her idea. Someone else was pulling the strings. David's jaw tightened as he realized. This dinner was no accident. It was part of something much bigger. And if he didn't find out who was behind it, tonight wouldn't just be about survival. It would be the beginning of a war he thought he'd left behind. David didn't touch the wine again. He let it sit between them like a silent accusation, its crimson surface reflecting the ceiling light. Claire busied herself with meaningless movements, straightening the napkin, pushing food that had already gone cold, pretending to take bites she never swallowed. He leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. But inside, he was studying her every twitch, every glance toward the window. Her fear wasn't of being caught lying to him. It was of something or someone waiting for the outcome. Claire, he said quietly, you flinched when the car passed outside. Who's out there? She shook her head too quickly. Nobody. You're imagining things. David's eyes narrowed. I don't imagine. The words landed heavy, and she dropped her gaze. He remembered the first time he had ever said that line, years ago in an interrogation room overseas. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a truth. His instincts didn't create stories. They read them. And right now, Every detail screamed that his wife wasn't alone in this betrayal. He reached for his fork, cutting slowly into the chicken, never looking away from her. "You've known me for 12 years, he said, his tone measured. "Do you really think I wouldn't notice?" Her breath hitched. "Notice what?" "The way your hand shook when you poured." He set the fork down. "The way your eyes keep checking the window." Claire swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She was cornered, and she knew it. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "David, you don't understand." "Then explain it," he pressed. Her hands knotted together in her lap. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't want to. But they said if I didn't, we'd both." She stopped herself, biting her lip until it went pale. David leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "We both what, Claire?" She looked away, staring at the wine glass as though it could swallow her words. Her silence was more telling than any confession. David's mind worked fast. If she was being forced, then this wasn't about money. It wasn't about jealousy. It was leverage. Someone had something over her, or over both of them. The idea hit him hard. Ethan. His jaw tightened. Their son was supposed to be at the neighbor's house tonight, but what if that was part of the plan too? What if the people outside weren't just waiting for confirmation of his death, but had already moved closer to their son? He rose suddenly from the table. Claire jumped, her chair scraping back. "David, wait," she cried. He moved to the front window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see the street. The same car from earlier was parked half a block down, engine still running, headlights off. Two silhouettes sat inside, motionless, watching. When he turned back, Claire's face was ashen. She knew exactly who they were. "Who are they?" His voice was ice now. Tears spilled down her cheeks, her mask cracking. "They said it would only put you to sleep," she whispered. "That it wouldn't hurt you. Just make it look like you slipped away naturally." David stared at her, his chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "And you believe them?" She broke then, sobbing into her hands. "I didn't have a choice, David. They know about you. They know everything. If I didn't do this, they said they'd take Ethan. They said," her words dissolved into sobs. For a long moment, David just stood there, his fists clenched. The betrayal cut deep, but the fear in her voice told him the truth. This wasn't her idea. She was a pawn in someone else's game, and he knew exactly whose kind of game it was. The old world he thought he'd buried. The world of shadows, lies, and operations that never reached the news had found him again. This wasn't just dinner. This was a test. And if he failed, it wouldn't just cost him his life. It would cost his family everything. The sobs that shook Claire's shoulders carried through the dining room, a sound David hadn't heard from her in years. Not the soft, ordinary cries of a bad day. This was something deeper, rawer, the sound of someone already cornered and waiting for the blow. David stayed at the window, his eyes locked on the car parked down the street. The silhouettes hadn't moved. They sat with the patience of predators, waiting for their signal, waiting for him to fall. "Claire," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're going to tell me exactly what they said, word for word." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trembling. "That they said you're a risk. That if I didn't help, they'd take Ethan. That no one would ever find him." The mention of their son's name lit a fire in David's chest. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Who are they?" Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her gaze flicked toward the window again, then back at him. Fear pinned her words to her throat. David crossed the room in 3 steady strides and crouched in front of her chair. His eyes bore into hers. "Look at me. Who are they?" She whispered the name like a curse. "Your past, David. The people you thought you left behind." The words landed like a knife. He felt the room tilt for a moment, memories flooding in, faces, missions, voices calling his name in the dark. For 12 years, he had convinced himself he was free. But he should have known better. Ghosts don't stay buried. The sound of Claire's phone vibrating on the table cut through the tension. Both their eyes dropped to it. A message flashed across the screen. Status? Did he drink? Claire's breath hitched. Her hand moved toward the phone, but David caught her wrist. "Don't," he said sharply. He snatched the phone himself and read the thread. Short, clinical instructions. No names. No warmth. Just commands. He set the phone down with care, then rose to his full height. His face was calm, but his veins thrummed with a dangerous energy. They're not leaving until they get an answer. Claire looked at him helplessly. What were we supposed to do? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked back to the table, lifted his untouched glass, and swirled the poisoned wine again. Under the light, he could see the faintest shimmer on its surface. To most eyes, it would be invisible. To his, it was obvious. He raised the glass slightly, studying Claire. If I send a wrong message, they'll come in here. If I send the right one, they'll wait. Her lips trembled. David, please don't make me. But he wasn't asking her. He was already moving toward the study. He sat at her desk, opened the message thread, and typed 3 words. It's done. He hit send. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the car's headlights blinked once, like a signal. The engine turned over, and the vehicle slowly pulled away from the curb. Claire let out a shaky breath, pressing her hands over her mouth. They believe it, she whispered. But David didn't relax. Not for a second. He knew the game too well. If they had been waiting for confirmation, they weren't gone. They were repositioning, watching, planning the next step. He stood in the doorway of the study, his silhouette heavy in the glow of the desk lamp. They're not finished, Claire. This was just the first move. Her tears had dried into streaks on her cheeks. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice fragile. David looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, what I should have done years ago. The house seemed to shrink around them, every shadow a reminder that they were no longer alone. The war he thought he'd buried was standing on his doorstep again. And this time, it wasn't just his life at stake. The house felt wrong after the message was sent, like the walls themselves were listening. Claire sat at the table, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if the act of holding on could keep her from shattering. David moved through the rooms with measured steps, checking locks, curtains, sight lines, old habits surfacing with chilling ease. He paused at the front window again. The street was empty now, but emptiness never comforted him. An empty street only meant the threat had repositioned. He let the curtain fall back into place and turned to Claire. You're going to tell me everything, he said. His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried the weight of command, something he hadn't used with her in all their years together. Claire flinched. David, start with Daniel, he cut in. When did he get involved? Her eyes darted toward the floor. Last month. He came to me with men I'd never seen before. He said they knew about you, about who you used to be. They said you were a liability, that if I didn't cooperate, they'd make sure Ethan disappeared. David's chest tightened at the sound of his son's name. And you believed them. Claire's eyes filled with tears again. What was I supposed to do? They knew things about you, things I never knew. They had photos, records. I thought if I didn't agree, her voice broke. We'd lose Ethan. I couldn't risk it. David studied her, torn between rage and grief. He had kept his past hidden to protect her, to protect Ethan. But now that secrecy had become the very weapon used against them. He sat across from her, lowering his voice. Did you ever stop to ask yourself why they wanted me gone? She looked at him, confused. They said you were dangerous, that you couldn't be trusted. David almost laughed, but it was humorless, bitter. That's exactly what they trained me to be. Silence stretched between them until the creak of the front porch broke it. David's head snapped toward the sound. He raised a finger to his lips, motioning for Claire to stay silent. The faint shuffle of feet across the wooden boards echoed through the house. He moved swiftly to the hallway closet, sliding the door open just enough to retrieve a small black case buried under winter coats. He hadn't opened it in years, but everything inside was perfectly maintained. Tools of man he swore he'd never be again. Claire's eyes widened as he cracked it open on the dining table. You said you left all that behind. I tried, David muttered, checking the compact pistol, the field knife, and the flash drive tucked in the lining. He glanced up at her. But you don't leave this kind of life, Claire. It leaves you. Another sound, this time the quiet metallic click of the back gate opening. David stood, gun in hand, and crossed to the kitchen. He whispered without looking back. If they come in, do exactly what I say. Don't argue. Don't think. Claire nodded shakily, her face pale. The kitchen window gave him a narrow view of the backyard. A figure moved in the shadows, Too deliberate to be a thief, too calm to be afraid. Another silhouette followed. David's pulse slowed instead of quickening, his body falling into the rhythm of years past. His breathing steadied, his grip on the weapon firm. He was no longer just David, the historian. He was the operative again. The back door handle jiggled once, twice, then fell still. Claire's breath hitched audibly. David's eyes narrowed, his voice barely above a whisper. They're testing us, seeing if we're awake. He stepped back into the dining room, set the pistol down within reach, and locked eyes with Claire. We don't have much time. If they don't get proof I'm gone soon, they'll come in. Her face crumpled. What are you going to do? David glanced at the poison glass still sitting on the table, the red liquid catching the light. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. And for the first time all night, Claire looked truly terrified of him. For a long beat, they only listened. To the refrigerator's low hum, to Claire's unsteady breath, to the faint creak of wood settling as if the house itself were afraid. David pointed at the table. We use what they expect, he said. A picture, a timeline, enough to make them stand down. Claire's phone buzzed hard against the wood. A new message blinked. Proof. Now. Left wrist visible. Time on screen. The precision chilled him. Standard verification. He had written similar checklists once. He moved quick, precise. In the kitchen, he poured his glass down the sink, sluiced the basin, then refilled the stem with a rinse of clean water and a touch of wine from the neck to stain the rim. He dabbed a drop on his cheek, smeared it with his thumb. Back at the table, he tipped the bottle so a red crescent pooled under his chair. Timer shot, he said, taking Claire's phone, setting 10 seconds, placing it on the sideboard. When I drop, take my pulse with your left hand. Hold the screen to their lens. Breathe like you're crying. Her face crumpled. They'll know if it looks staged. It won't. He flattened his shirt, loosened his collar, and lay on the floor at an angle a medic would recognize as careless. He closed his eyes and slowed his breathing until each inhale sounded like a thread being pulled. The timer ticked, the shutter clicked. Claire's fingers landed at his neck, but trembled so badly she found only air. Another buzz. Video. Say the words. He isn't breathing. Claire's eyes were wild now. David, they won't stop. They'll come. He pushed up to a knee, voice a steady whisper. 30 seconds. Then we send. Then we move. He reset to video, handed her the phone. She held it over him, lips shaking. He isn't. Her gaze snagged on the glasses, on the faint shimmer he'd seen, on the fear that had been chewing her from the inside. A terrible thought formed behind her eyes. If it truly was only a sedative, if the men had told her the truth, then proving it would keep Ethan safe. Claire, don't. He saw it gather and tried to catch it, but panic makes hands quick. She reached across the table, not for her untouched stem, but for his, the one that had been poisoned before he rinsed, the one he hadn't dared tip or swap in case a droplet clung to the lip. She lifted it to show the lens, as if performance could buy them mercy. Watch, she said desperate. It's safe. Claire. He lunged, but the glass had already tilted. A mouthful. A swallow. Her face changed mid-breath, surprise collapsing into horror. She gagged, coughed once, twice, the sound raw. The stem clattered and spun, ringing against the table leg. He caught her by the shoulders as her knees buckled. Spit now, spit out. She tried, choking red into her palm, eyes pleading for an outcome he couldn't promise. They told me sedative, she rasped. The bitterness had found the back of her tongue. The body knows a lie faster than the mind. He hauled her to the sink, forced water between her lips, knowing how little good it would do. Cyanide worked too fast, too deep. He tore open the black case on the counter, hands moving without choices. Inhalant ampoule, crush and breathe, the sharp sting flooding the air. Stay with me, he said, holding it under her nose. Claire, look at me. Her pupils fluttered. A tremor ran through her arms. He could hear his own heart now, a heavy drum in a room gone small. The front camera chimed. Another message lit the phone on the table. Cruelly ordinary. Confirm outcome. Door in 2 minutes. He laid her on the kitchen tile, wedged a folded towel beneath her shoulders to ease her breath, and checked his watch with a soldier's cruelty. 2 minutes, he murmured, as if time were a thing a man could bargain with. He stripped his emotions to the wire and spoke like the field. "Claire, can you hear me?" Her lips moved. He leaned close. "Ethan," she breathed, the name like a plea stitched to a prayer. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I have him." He didn't know yet how, only that it would be true. He slid the ampoule aside, spent, and reached for the second, knowing it was never designed for this dose. Sirens would only bring men with clean boots. Ambulances could be intercepted. The options arrayed themselves like a bleak map. The front door shivered once, twice, with a testing pressure. David lifted his head, every muscle taut. The house seemed to hold its breath with him. He angled his body between the kitchen and the hall, pistol low, voice low. "You will not open that door," he told the wood, the men, the past. Claire's hand searched for his, found it, squeezed, small and burning. He looked down. In her eyes was not accusation, but a terrible trust. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I know," he said. And for the first time all night, the words were not strategy, but confession. The lock turned under a tool he recognized. Metal kissed metal. Claire's breath stuttered. The timer in David's mind hit 0. He squeezed her fingers once, then let go and became the man the world hoped had died. Metal kissed metal. The lock turned with the soft authority of a practiced hand. David rose from the tiles in one fluid line, placing himself between the kitchen threshold and the front hall, pistol low, elbows loose, breath a metronome. Claire's fingers squeezed as once, hot, frantic, then fell back to the towel beneath her shoulders as another tremor ran through her. The door opened a hand's width. No words, no theatrical threats, just the thin slice of a gloved hand, the shadow of a shoulder, and the dull gleam of a suppressed sidearm. Professionals. Confirm and stage, not smash and grab. David flicked the hallway switch off. Darkness swallowed the entry, leaving only the soft kitchen glow behind him. He stepped left, out of the sight line he knew they'd clear first, and let the first operator commit. One step over the threshold, muzzle indexed high, chin tucked. David moved into the pocket of the man's arc, jammed the wrist, drove the forearm down and away, and let gravity take the gun to the rug. An elbow to the sternum, a twist at the elbow joint. The man folded without a sound. The second flowed in on cue, 2 beats behind, pivoting toward the kitchen light. David saw him only as a changing triangle of shadow, a stance he recognized from another lifetime. He kicked the door hard. It rebounded into the man's shoulder and stole his balance. David closed the distance, caught the collar, and turned him into the jam. The weapon clattered. A hiss through teeth, a palm strike across the ear, and the house exhaled again. "Stay," David whispered to the dark, and for a moment it did. He cuffed them fast with zip ties scavenged from the junk drawer, binding wrists to ankles in compact bundles, then rolled each man to his side, so lungs stayed clear. Not mercy, utility. He wanted them breathing. He wanted answers. "Confirm." A voice crackled softly from an earpiece still looped around the first man's neck. The channel was clipped, clinical. Status window closing. David pulled the bud free, held it to his own ear, and kept his voice low, threaded with a strain he didn't have to fake. "Stand by," he said. He let them hear the kitchen hum, a woman's thin breath in the background, the far tick of a clock. Real life. Real death. On the second man's wrist, as the sleeve rode back from the zip tie, David saw it. A small scar-etched emblem. A circle split by a vertical bar. Not a gang mark. Not freelance. A unit he briefed before he was a husband. The room tilted a degree, then steadied. Not foreign. His past. Claire coughed, wet, ragged. He was back beside her in 2 strides, cracking the second inhalant ampoule and holding it beneath her nose. "Breathe," he said, trying to make command sound like comfort. Her lips were pale now, edges darkening, eyes slipping out of focus and then fighting back. "I didn't want," she started. "I know." He pinched the bridge of his nose to stop the tremor in his own voice and failed. "Hold on." The earpiece hissed again. "If no visual in 60, we enter. Natural causes protocol. Bring kit." Natural. The word landed like rust in his mouth. He rose and moved the 2 men, Light switch, laundry door, a short drag across tile that remembered muddy boots and soccer cleats. He propped them against the washer, padded pockets, found a small gray pouch labeled with lot numbers and a universal skull that no one in his line of work needed to read to understand. He closed his fist around it until the foil crinkled. "Who sent you?" he asked, soft, to the room, to the men, to the emblem on the wrist. Neither operative answered. Trained silence held. But somewhere in the earpiece, a third voice cut in, older, smoother, the kind of voice that preferred conference tables to doorways. "Confirm and clear," it said. "No deviations." Claire's breath shortened. David set the pouch down as if it were a live coal and crossed back to her. He elevated her shoulders, counted the seconds between inhales, and felt the space stretching too far. The math wrote itself on the back of his eyelids. Dose unknown. Ampoules inadequate. Ambulance risky. Minutes finite. "Ethan," she whispered again, a child's name lit from within by everything she couldn't say. He squeezed her hand. "He's safe," he said, making a promise he would turn into truth. Headlights swept the front windows, another car taking a slow, searching pass. David slid the earpiece back in. "Visual compromised," he said, giving them just enough. Waiting for signal to move remains. He wanted them to wait. Wanted them to believe the worst thing had already happened, so they wouldn't invent a worse. "Copy," the smooth voice replied after a beat. "Hold." Secondary team repositioning. A shadow crossed the backyard fence. The same measured pace as before, now with purpose. David set Claire's hand gently on the towel and stood, feeling the old geometry settle into his bones. Angles, cover, timing. He checked the pistol by feel, verified one in the chamber, and glanced once more at the emblem on the bound wrist in the laundry room. The past had not just found him. It had sent his own handwriting to finish the letter. He killed the kitchen light. The house narrowed to shapes and breath. "You're not opening this door," he told the dark again. And then, louder, to the men who had trained him and now wanted to erase him. "You wrote this protocol." "So did I." Claire's fingers searched for him, found the hem of his shirt, and let go. He stepped into the hall, into the dim that had always fit him better than daylight, and waited for the second entry he knew was coming. Ready this time not just to survive it, but to pull a thread that would unravel the hand at the other end. The second entry began with silence. No pounding, no shouted threats, just the careful shifting of weight against the back fence, the faint scrape of a boot's sole on wet grass. David stood in the hall with his pistol angled low, counting the steps in his head. 3. Pause. 2 more. He could picture the intruder's stance before the shadow even broke across the glass of the back door. Claire's ragged breathing filled the kitchen. She clutched the towel to her chest, her face drained of color. Every so often her body jerked with a tremor, and each time David's jaw tightened. He knew her strength was slipping fast. The door latch clicked once, then again. A thin wedge of moonlight outlined the intruder's gloved hand as it eased the lock free. David moved sideways into the blind spot, the rhythm of his steps as controlled as his breathing. He could smell the faint chemical tang of gun oil drifting in as the door opened. The operative slipped in, smooth as a shadow. He carried no flashlight. He didn't need one. His body language was that of someone who knew the layout, someone who had studied blueprints, not guessed. David recognized the precision. He had moved the same way, years ago, into other people's homes. The man froze when he caught sight of Claire collapsed on the tile. A whisper broke the silence. Visual confirmed. David was on him in a blink, the pistol but connecting with the base of the skull. The intruder crumpled forward, his suppressed weapon clattering against the floor. David caught him by the vest, dragged him deeper inside, and kicked the door closed with barely a sound. Claire stirred, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to register what had happened. "There's more," she breathed, her voice breaking. "I know," David said, crouching low. From outside, he could already hear it, the faint shuffle of another figure circling wide, testing other points of entry. They weren't rushing. They weren't careless. This was confirmation, a sweep to make sure the job was clean. He stripped the fallen man of his radio, clicking the receiver just enough to hear the line buzz alive. Status? A voice demanded. Confirmed. Subject neutralized. Holding, David replied, pitching his tone flat, mimicking the clip cadence he had heard 100 times before. The voice hesitated, then gave a curt copy. For the moment, they believed, but David knew belief wouldn't last. When a man failed to check back, suspicion would bloom. He crouched beside Claire again, lifting her head gently. You have to stay awake. Her lips parted, cracked, whispering, I didn't mean for it to be this. I know, he said again, more firmly this time. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. Her eyes brimmed with tears. They said it wouldn't kill you. Just enough to make you sick. Just enough to make them believe. But Daniel, he changed it, didn't he? David's silence was answer enough. She turned her head weakly, a sob shaking through her chest. My own brother sold me out. David brushed damp hair from her face. He sold both of us out. Footsteps sounded outside again, closer this time at the side window. A shadow leaned in, scanning. David pressed himself against the wall, pistol raised, steadying his breath. The figure lingered, then moved on. For the first time all night, David felt something colder than fear rising in his chest. Clarity. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to threaten. They were here to erase. Erase him, erase his family, erase every trace of the life he'd tried to build. He looked down at Claire, her hand twitching toward his. Stay with me, he said softly. I need you alive. Her eyes glistened with a flicker of hope, but he saw the resignation there too. She was slipping, and as the shadows outside regrouped, David understood. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. The men hunting him tonight weren't strangers. They were his past, his training, his own unfinished work staring back at him. And if he didn't stop them here, in this house, then everything, Claire, Ethan, even the life he had sacrificed to build, would end under someone else's signature. He tightened his grip on the pistol, every sense sharpened. The night wasn't over. It was just beginning. The house had fallen into that strange stillness that comes before the storm. Quiet, but charged with intent. David crouched near the dining room doorway, pistol steady, listening. Every creak of the floorboards, every shifting shadow from the streetlights outside felt amplified. The men hadn't stormed in yet. They were disciplined. They were waiting for something, confirmation, timing, or a signal David couldn't yet hear. On the kitchen tile, Claire fought for breath. Her face was pale, beads of sweat running down her temples. Each inhalation came shallow, labored, and ragged. David could hear her body losing the fight minute by minute. He knelt beside her, brushing her clammy skin with his thumb. Stay awake, he said firmly. Don't give them what they want. Her eyes opened faintly, glistening with pain. David, they know everything. Things I never asked about. He swallowed hard. That's because they're mine. My files. My missions. Claire blinked slowly, confusion crossing her face. Yours. The words dragged a weight through his chest. He hadn't wanted to say it aloud. Not now. But the truth was clawing its way to the surface. I wrote the protocols. Years ago. Back when I was them. He hesitated, his jaw tight. I designed the exit strategies for agents who couldn't be trusted anymore. For men who disappeared. Her lips trembled. And now it's you. He forced himself to hold her gaze. And now it's me. A thud sounded from the back porch, breaking the moment. Someone had dropped down from the fence, boots landing firm. David froze, then slid Claire's phone toward him across the tile. The last message still glowed, confirm outcome. Door in 2 minutes. He glanced at the timer on his watch. They were almost out of patience. He clicked into the stolen earpiece. His voice was low, controlled. Secondary team repositioned. Holding visual. A pause crackled back. Then that smooth, commanding voice again. If you're inside, confirm. Send image of subject. David's mind raced. He looked at Claire. Her chest rose unevenly, her skin too pale. He could send the proof they wanted, her collapsed body next to a spilled glass. But the thought tore through him like shrapnel. To use her as a prop, to let them believe she was gone too. It was unthinkable. Still, time was evaporating. He reached for the unconscious operative in the laundry room, dragging him into view. Positioning him just right, David snapped a blurred photo in the low light, angled so that the outline looked like a body slumped unnaturally. He sent it through the stolen device. The reply was swift. Copy. Hold perimeter. Confirm sweep in 15. 15 minutes. That was all he'd bought. He moved quickly back to Claire. She tried to speak, her voice a faint rasp. They won't stop, will they? David shook his head. Not until they believe it's finished. Not until I make them. Her fingers weakly clutched at his sleeve. Daniel, he said they'd leave Ethan alone. He promised. Daniel lied, David said flatly. He could see it all now, the chain of betrayal that had led them here. Daniel wasn't just her foolish brother caught in gambling debts or desperation. He had delivered Claire directly to them, used her love for Ethan as leverage, broken her piece by piece until she agreed to do the unthinkable. David's jaw set hard. If Daniel was in this deep, then he was either a pawn or worse, a willing accomplice. And if Daniel had chosen the latter, David knew exactly what it meant. His wife's brother had signed her death warrant long before tonight. Outside, headlights swept the window again. This time, the car didn't pass. It slowed. Stopped. A door opened. Claire's voice broke through, thin and urgent. David, don't let them take Ethan. His chest tightened. He bent down, pressed his forehead to hers. I won't. I promise. It wasn't a comfort. It was a vow. Then he rose to his feet, pistol firm in his hand, and stared toward the dark outline at the end of the drive. 15 minutes wasn't enough time to save them both. But it was enough to make the men outside regret ever thinking he could be erased. And somewhere out there, Daniel would answer for what he had done. A car door thudded shut at the curb. Unhurried, confident. David slid the earpiece back in and kept his pistol low. Claire's breaths came like torn paper, each one shorter than the last. He checked her pulse. It fluttered under his fingers, then hid. Stay, he whispered and rose. The porch boards creaked once. A shadow paused at the frosted glass, listening. David spoke into the mic, steady and clipped. Interior secure. Subject non-responsive. Standing by for sweep. Static. Then the smooth voice he'd heard earlier, closer now, almost conversational. Copy. Confirm handler code. David let the silence stretch a beat, then gave a phrase no outsider would know. Greybook 7. Archive 2. A breath, the faintest smile inside a voice. Well, someone remembers the hymnal. Then, with intimate precision, Pilgrim, are you tired of pretending? The old call sign hit like cold water. Not an enemy, not a freelancer. His own house reaching back through the years to collect him. Mason, David said, and the name tasted like rust. Walk it in, Pilgrim. Mason murmured, as if coaxing a skittish horse. Natural causes. Mercy for the boy. No more noise. Claire stirred. David, she whispered, barely sound at all. He knelt fast, crushed the last inhalant, and held it under her nose. Look at me, he said, trying to find the ground under his voice. Her eyes fluttered, found him, begged. He wanted to promise the impossible. He settled for truth. I'm here. Back to the mic. You used her, he said. Collateral. Mason corrected softly. You accepted that when you lied to her. You wrote the protocol, remember? We only follow it. David's jaw locked until it ached. He slid to the laundry doorway, looked at the bound operatives, looked at the gray pouch with tidy lot numbers, tools for staging a heart attack, clean and quiet. He thought of the binder he'd drafted in another life. Exit strategies for men like him who didn't stay gone. Confirm outcome, Mason said. Then we all sleep. David's gaze fell to Claire. A tremor moved through her. The towel under her shoulders darkened with sweat. He counted her breaths, 5, 6, and heard the missing 7th arrive late. He had minutes, maybe less, before the clock made the decision for him. Visual in 15, he said, buying time. 10, Mason answered. Don't make me send the team. Headlights slid past the window and stopped. Another car. The house held its breath. David's world narrowed to 3 points. The woman on the floor, the man in his ear, the childhood room down the street where his son slept. He put the phone on record and set on the counter, screen dark, mic open to the room's small sounds. "Say it clean," he told the air. "You ordered her to do it." A silence that wasn't uncertainty, but calculation. Then, we compelled a compliant outcome. "For the record, Dormative, your brother-in-law corrupted the chain. And you, Pilgrim, you are the risk that required resolution." A pause. No one will miss a quiet man with a weak heart. Claire's fingers searched for him and found his sleeve. He took her hand in both of his, the way he had on the day Ethan was born. "I'm sorry," she breathed. And he realized the apology wasn't for tonight. It was for believing the wrong men, for not asking sooner who he'd been, for loving him with a blindfold he had tied. "You're forgiven," he said, and his voice broke. Her eyes softened. Her chest rose and fell. The space between lengthened. He felt the exact moment the world leaned away from her. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck and willed the pulse to answer. It didn't. He laid her hand down gently, as if it could sleep. For a heartbeat, he let himself be the widower in a kitchen no longer theirs. Then the operative took the place of the husband. He sealed the recorder, slid it into his pocket, and formed a new shape out of grief. Purpose with edges. "Confirm," Mason prompted. It sounded almost kind. David stood. "Confirmed," he said, and the word was a blade he turned in his own chest. "Hold perimeter. I'll stage the room." "Attaboy," Mason said, soft and paternal. "Send the image. We'll keep the boy untouched." David killed the kitchen light. In the dark, he moved with the old geometry, stripping the magazines from the downed men, towing their weapons under the washer, looping a second set of ties through the first. He took a photo of the dining room that showed everything and nothing. A collapsed chair, a spill like a shadow, an empty glass. "Received," Mason said. Relief bled into command. "Team 2, stand down to sweep. Pilgrim, exit through the back. Leave the door on the latch." "Copy," David said. He clicked the line dead. He knelt once more beside Claire and pressed his lips to her forehead. "I will keep him safe," he said, and made it a vow the way he used to make promises to men who never came home. He grabbed the small black case, the go bag from the coat closet, Claire's phone, and the gray pouch he would later hand to someone who could read a crime shorthand. Then he eased the back door open and slipped into the cut of night behind the garage, keeping to shadow, counting fences, listening for the soft mistakes of men who believed the game was over. At the side gate, he paused and texted the neighbor a single word. "Inside," their old storm code, and followed it with a location pin. Not their house, but the school 2 blocks away with bright lights and cameras that actually worked. He pictured Ethan's small face, sleep-heavy and frowning, and felt the world snap into a simpler axis. He reached the alley, kept low behind trash bins, and jogged to the sedan he'd stashed 2 streets over. Doors unlocked with a quiet pulse. He set the go bag on the passenger floor and, in the ash-gray wash of the dome light, looked at his hands, steady again, not because he was calm, but because he had chosen a direction. He dialed a number from memory, one he hadn't used in 12 years. It rang twice, then a voice he could have drawn from shadows answered. "You're not supposed to have this." "Meet me," David said. "You can end this, or I can end you." A beat. "Where?" He named a place that was no one's but theirs, an unfinished office floor where plastic still clung to the carpet and the city looked like a circuit board. He started the engine. In the mirror, his house sat small and ordinary, lights off, a place where cartoons once played on Saturday mornings. "Pilgrim," Mason said quietly in his ear, as if he were still inside the kitchen. "Don't do anything you can't take back." David pulled into the empty street. "You took everything," he said, and drove toward the one conversation that would decide what his son grew up believing about the man who raised him. The elevator opened onto an unfinished floor where plastic still clung to the carpet and the city's lights looked like circuitry through naked glass. David stepped out, the building's HVAC thrumming like a distant engine. He left the lights off. Concrete, steel, taped drywall seams, no furniture, nowhere to hide. His phone vibrated once. Inside, door locked. The neighbor, the school, cameras. He closed his eyes for a breath, felt the text settle like a hand on his back, then slid the phone to silent and moved on. Footsteps arrived from the stairwell, measured, confident. Mason Cole emerged, tailored in slate wool that drank the night, 2 men behind him carrying the kind of stillness that meant training. Mason's hair was neater than memory, his smile just as gentle. "Pilgrim," he said, quiet as a benediction. David didn't answer. He set a black recorder on a plastic-wrapped desk and tapped it once. Red light. He kept his pistol pointed at the floor, fingers straight, not bargaining so much as creating a geometry everyone could live through. Mason's eyes drifted to the recorder, then back. "We both know what this is," he said. "A sad end to a mistake that began when you tried to be someone ordinary." "You sent men to my house," David said. His voice surprised him. Flat, not raised, as if the words had calcified. "You gave my wife a dormitive that wasn't. You called it mercy." Mason sighed, practiced sorrow. "Dormitive was the plan. Your brother-in-law made his own arrangement. You picked dangerous people to love." David's jaw flexed. "You picked them for me." A sliver of silence. Then Mason nodded once, almost paternal. "We curate outcomes. You wrote the rules, Pilgrim. You know what we protect when we protect secrets." "Say it clean," David said, and stepped closer so the recorder would taste every consonant. "You ordered the operation against me. You leveraged Claire." Mason's smile thinned. He measured the distance to his men, to the stairwell, to the recorder, then chose a truth he could live with. "Compliance authorized a corrective action," he said. "Leverage was applied where effective. The asset." He almost made Claire sound like a file folder. "Accepted terms." David let the words hang, then reached into his pocket and thumbed a screen alive. A series of attachments queued, addressed to a journalist who didn't scare easily and to an oversight address that had once terrified rookies. Mason watched the motion like a chess player eyeing a clock. "You think you're the first to try the press?" Mason asked softly. "We outlive headlines." "You won't outlive audio," David said, and hit send. Packets began to sprint toward towers David couldn't see but trusted like gravity. One of Mason's men shifted his weight, the soft leather whisper of a stance change. David didn't look at him. "Don't," he said, and meant it. Mason folded his hands. "Walk away, Pilgrim. We'll file your exit as natural. Your boy will grow with a pension trust and a story that spares him his father's worst chapters. His mother is dead because you preferred clean paperwork to honest risk," David said. The sentence shook once in the middle and hardened by the end. "You don't get to write anything for him." Mason's gaze cooled. "Then we're finished." He flicked 2 fingers. The escorts began to fan. David slid his heel against a glued-down plastic runner and nudged a thumb-sized cylinder from beneath it. The pellet rolled in a lazy arc, hissed once, and bloomed a dense white that bit the throat. The building's heat sensors blinked awake. Alarms wailed. Sprinkler heads spat cold needles from the ceiling. Chaos scrambles men, even trained ones. The escorts lost angles under the rain. David moved like a remembered diagram. 2 steps, forearm, wrist, elbow, disarming without ending. A gun skittered. A knee buckled. He shoved a metal service gate down across the stairwell with a clang that turned the floor into a cage. Mason backpedaled, blinking water, face gone hard. David leveled the pistol at the concrete near Mason's feet and fired once. The crack ricocheted through the hollow floor. Dust coughed from the slab. "Look at me," David said over the siren. "I want the last thing you remember to be the face that didn't disappear." Mason swallowed, a tiny human motion that made him mortal for the first time that night. "You can't keep the boys safe forever," he said, water flattening his hair to his scalp. "You will sleep eventually." David stepped closer until the rain from the sprinklers ran off the brim of his lashes. "Then hear me under oath," he said, and the word surprised him by sounding like a prayer. "I will spend every waking hour making your institution answer for what it made of us." He lifted his free hand and showed Mason the phone. Scent glowed under every file. Beneath it, a new message appeared from the journalist. "Got it. Verifying. Call me if you can." Another from a number David knew, but had never saved. Receipt acknowledged. "Stay where you are." Sirens Dopplered closer outside. No longer a maybe but a map line converging. The escorts, zip-tied with cords ripped from the plastic-wrapped desks, glistened in the artificial rain. Mason considered his next expression like a man choosing a tie. He settled on wounded dignity. "You'll drown the room and think it baptizes you," he said quietly. "It won't." David let the pistol lower a few degrees, not in mercy, but in conclusion. "It already did," he said. Boots pounded in the stairwell below the gate. Firefighters shouted. A building manager's voice rose, anxious and officious. Blue strobes washed the wet walls. David stepped back from Mason and set his pistol on the floor with 2 fingers, then kicked it toward a puddle where it lay harmless and obvious. "Hands," he said. Mason lifted them, palms out, a show for whoever came through first. No one would know what the rain had washed clean or what it had revealed. But the recorder in David's pocket, the files already off-site, the copy of Claire's last minutes he would never play for anyone but himself. Those would live where water couldn't reach. The service gate ratcheted up. Smoke and steam funneled. Uniforms poured in. "On the ground," someone yelled. David lowered himself, cheek against wet plastic, staring at the man who had tried to write his ending. Through the siren's iron whine, he heard a phantom sound. A boy's small exhale against the school gym's cinder block wall, safe for 1 more hour. He closed his eyes and let the rain soak him until every line he'd ever crossed felt washed and still there, until the men with clean boots became just men again, shouting directions no one would remember, while a recorder in his pocket remembered everything. Hands pulled David to his feet, then back down, then flat, standard procedure under strobing lights and clanging alarms. Water sheeted from the sprinklers, pooling around the plastic-wrapped desks. He kept his palms open, his voice level. "There's a medical emergency at my house," he told the nearest officer. "Possible cyanide ingestion. 2 armed males restrained on site. You need hazmat protocols." The words came out like coordinates. The officer hesitated, then keyed his radio and repeated them verbatim. Across the room, Mason straightened under a firefighter's glare, suit darkened to an oil slick. He tried the smile that worked in hearing rooms. "Misunderstanding," he offered. "Training evolution gone sideways." An investigator in a soaked windbreaker pointed at the recorder, still blinking red. "We'll let that decide," she said, bagging it. David didn't take his eyes off the officer with the radio. "Patch me to dispatch," he said. They did. He gave his address, Claire's condition, the words you never want to say about the person you love. Unresponsive. He added the detail that mattered most. The compound is likely cyanide, and heard the cadence on the other end shift from routine to urgent. Units rolled. Hazmat pinged awake in a different part of the city. Somewhere in that web, strangers began moving toward the kitchen where he had knelt, toward the life that had ended before sirens knew her name. They cuffed him, not rough, just by the book, and guided him to a chair. The neighbor's text glowed on his screen again. Inside. Gym doors locked. "Officer with us. He's okay." He exhaled for the first time in an hour. A detective crouched. "You want to tell me why there are men zip-tied in your laundry room?" David met his eyes. "Because the ones who sent them don't like loose ends." The detective looked over at Mason. "And he is the loose ends boss," David said. The room filled with overlapping systems. Fire, police, building management, federal badges that didn't like being wet. The journalist's reply flashed between them all. "Publishing now." A federal pair peeled Mason away toward the stairwell. He kept his voice low, his spine tall, rehearsing a narrative about rogue contractors and overzealous relatives. David watched him talk and wondered if the rain could wash the taste of that voice from walls. They walked David out under a silver blanket, down past hoses and ladder trucks, and a manager wringing his hands about insurance. In the back of a cruiser with the door open for air, he gave the first statement. The call he overheard, the bottle, the messages, the men, the emblem on a wrist he'd once briefed, the gray pouch with its tidy lie. He didn't dramatize. He didn't hide. He spoke the way he had written protocols, clean lines, no adverbs. Radio chatter cracked. Scene secured at his house. 1 operative concussed. 1 awake and compliant. 3rd, unknown. Female DOA. The last acronym arrived without the softness real death requires. David closed his eyes. The blanket slid from his shoulders. For a moment, the noise blurred. He pictured Claire's fingers around his sleeve, the exact heat of her palm, the way trust had looked in her eyes when the world was untrustworthy. He let the grief land and not move. "Mr. Carter," the detective said gently, as if the formality could hold a human thing. "We need you to come downtown." David nodded. "After the school," he said. It wasn't a question. The detective studied him, then gave a small, practical nod. After the school, they reached the gym at dawn's first thin stripe. The officer on duty opened the side door. Ethan sat on the bleachers wrapped in a borrowed sweatshirt, hair a sleep-tangled crown. He looked up at his father and then down at his shoes, sensing the gravity but not its shape. David crossed the polished floor with steps that felt both too loud and too quiet. "Hey, bud," he said, sinking to a knee. Ethan looked at the blanket, at the damp cuffs of his father's sleeves. "Is Mom okay?" The question broke across the room like a brittle thing. David's answer was a hand on the small, warm back and a voice that chose the only true path it could. "She got hurt," he said. "Some people made bad choices. I'm going to make sure they can't hurt us again." Ethan leaned in, small ribs moving like a sparrow's. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," David said quickly, fiercely. "You did everything right." A plain sedan took them to the station. Statements layered. Chain of custody forms accrued. The recorder was cloned to drives that would outlive everyone in the room. A Fed with tired eyes slid a paper across the table. "We'll need you to testify," she said. "There's going to be a lot of noise." David signed. "Make sure the right people hear it." By mid-morning, the journalist's piece had swallowed first pages. Words like compliance protocol and domestic coercion climbed trend bars. Mason's quote, "measured, wounded," competed with a transcript that made it ring hollow. An internal affairs office announced a review. Then, faster than David expected, arrest teams moved. Daniel was found at a motel off the interstate, a gray case in the sink, fingers raw from scrubbing a label he couldn't unprint. He looked smaller in the booking photo than he ever had in family pictures. They let David see Claire before the transport. The room was cold and bright. This time there were no timers, no radios, no doors testing themselves against their hinges. He touched two fingertips to her wrist, not because he expected to find anything, but because love learns rituals even when they stop working. "I should have told you sooner," he said, the sentence landing with a thud and a prayer. "I will carry the part that was mine." Outside, the day had turned crystalline and ordinary. He signed a temporary protection order, learned how to speak in coded smallness with a boy who wanted pancakes and an answer nothing on earth could supply. They drove home behind an unmarked car. The house was taped and cataloged and emptied of its night. A forensic tech handed him a sealed bag. Inside, his watch with the stained strip, Claire's phone wiped of prints by grief and sweat, the gray pouch that would tell a jury more than any speech. He took Ethan to the park 2 streets over because the Swings didn't know what had happened. They sat on a bench, paper cups of water sweating in their hands. David lifted his to his lips and stopped. He set it down and lifted it again, feeling ridiculous and human. Ethan watched him, then clinked his cup to his father's. "To us?" he asked, trying out an adult thing. David managed something like a smile. "To us," he said, and they drank. He didn't mistake the moment for peace. He knew systems don't change because one recorder speaks. He knew men like Mason molt and reappear. He knew grief arrives in waves and administrative letters. But he also knew the math he could live by. One boy, one promise, one truth told clean whenever it was asked for. That night, when the house held still, David took the go bag from the closet and removed 3 things: the pistol, the knife, the old phone. He placed them in a drawer, locked it, and slid the key to a hook Ethan couldn't reach. On the kitchen table, he set something else, a blank notebook. He wrote the first line like a report and a prayer. For Ethan, this is who we were. This is who we will be.